Hello friends, my name is Aisling. Thank you very much for being here, and today of course I'm here to talk about books. This video is going to be about is a book tag. So it's one that I've seen doing the rounds on YouTube lately, and I'm probably doing it that little bit late, but I'm going to get it in there anyway. So it is the end of the year book tag. So without further ado, we're just going to get straight into it. So the first question is, are there books that you've started this year that you still need to finish? I've had a few DNFs this year, but there is one book that I kind of half DNF'd and figured that I would go back to it by the end of the year. I don't know if that is the case. I don't know if I'm going to get around to reading the rest of it, but the book in question, of course, is Upside Down. It's the Wind Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami. So I started reading this book a couple of months ago, and I got probably about 2/3 of the way through, and then I just put it down, put it aside. I thought maybe it could be right book, kind of wrong time, which is absolutely fair enough. I have been reading a lot of more fast-paced fantasy this year, and I think maybe that's could be potentially why I haven't enjoyed this one as much. I have read some of Murakami's writing before, and one thing I will say is that he is not going to win Feminist of the Year at all. So if you are not somebody who can overlook the objectification of women in books, this is not going to be one for you, and neither are any of his other books, I believe, unfortunately. But so this book, we follow a man and he's living with his wife, and their cat goes missing, and all of a sudden some really strange things start to happen. He starts to receive some really bizarre phone calls, really explicit, and then his wife disappears. He meets a young girl and befriends her and has some strange kind of interactions with her as well. And I will say it's quite a slow-paced book. It's definitely a character-driven novel, and I feel like that could have been kind of what was putting me off a little bit. It's definitely one that's not very plot-heavy, and I was kind of finding myself reluctantly reading along, and I thought maybe I should just put this aside and read it when I'm more in the mood for it. The mood unfortunately still hasn't struck, so I haven't quite gotten there, and I was hoping to read it by the end of the year, but who knows. Your guess is as good as mine. The next question is then, do you have an autumnal book to transition into the end of the year? And short answer is no, I actually don't. As I said, I feel like I'm probably doing this video a little bit late, but I did have some books that I wanted to read in, say, October. So if you check out my October TBR and my October wrap up, there were some autumnally books in there. Okay, so the next question then is there a new release you're still waiting for? So there were 3 new releases that I was waiting for kind of toward the end of this year. So 2 of them have actually already been published. So one of them is yet to be published. First one was, if you've been around here for a while, you know that I absolutely adored Legends and Lattes when I read it earlier this year. We follow Viv, who is an orc but decides to get out of the life of bounty hunting and decides to set up her own coffee shop in a city where people have never heard of coffee before. It's really wholesome, it's really low stakes. There is a story, it's quite tame, there's nothing too stressful going on there. It's really sweet, and it's exactly what I needed at the time. And so Bookshops and Bone Dust is the prequel to Legends and Lattes, and that was released last week on the 7th of November, I believe. I haven't quite gotten my hands on it yet, but I'm really looking forward to reading it. And if there's anything I love more than the coffee shop, it's a bookshop, of course. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what the story is there. The next one then is another one, and I had pre-ordered this one. So the first book in the series needs absolutely no introduction. You're surely sick of hearing about it, and that was Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros, and I read that a couple of months ago, and I was really excited by it purely because the author has the same chronic illness that I have, and it's considered to be rare, and I have never read about it or seen it represented in a book or a TV show or a film or any other different forms of media. So I was really excited to see then that the author was representing this. So it is a connective tissue disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and I was really excited to see the representation for this. But in hindsight, and I've had some time to think about it, I do think that maybe she misrepresented it quite a bit. Our protagonist Violet Sorrengail has this condition. It is never actually named in the book, which I think is a shame, but she does struggle because of her condition, which is unnamed, and she does find things difficult. But what there is in Iron Flame is a little bit of toxic representation, because people living with chronic illness, people living with disabilities know that there are oftentimes a lot of things in life that you won't be able to do, sadly, because of your illness or your disability, and that's just how it is. And we are taught that we have to pace ourselves, and sometimes there are just things that you can't do. But in this book, Violet pushes through absolutely everything to her own detriment. She hurts herself, and that's a really toxic way of living with a chronic illness or a disability, and I feel like it's a shame that it was represented in that way. Now, I do know it's a fantasy book, it's fast paced, we can't just have our main character sitting around feeling sorry for herself all the time, but it is the reality of it sometimes, and I feel like maybe there could have been a little bit more of that representation. But anyway, with that said, I did pre-order Iron Flame, which is the sequel to that book, and I'm happy enough to read it, but I am definitely not as excited about it as I was. I know that Yaros is also coming under fire at the moment for her, we shall say, political views, or for her lack thereof maybe, but I'm not here to vilify the author. I'm just going to read the book and I'm going to move on. Third book isn't out yet. It will be released on Stephen's Day, Boxing Day, basically the day after Christmas. I definitely should not be buying books the day after Christmas, because I know I will be receiving books for Christmas, but here we are. I really want to read this book. So the first book was Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. We follow some characters in a world that feels very kind of World War II England, I suppose. But there's some fantasy in there as well, and I'm really looking forward to finding out in the second book, which comes out, which of course is called Ruthless Vows. I'm really looking forward to finding out a bit more about the fantasy side of the story, because we know that things are happening, we know that there's a war between gods, but we don't know much more than that really. We don't know how the fantasy side of the story really works or how everything came about, so I'm looking forward to some more backstory there and to see what's actually really going on between the gods and all of this. It was a really great read. I loved the epistolary kind of aspects of it, so how the main characters were sending each other letters through their closets and things like that. So it was for me, I found it quite a novel, quite a new way of telling a story, and I'm really looking forward to that. So yes. And then the next question is, what are 3 books that you want to read before the end of the year? So there are 3 books on my TBR that I would really like to get around to before the end of the year, but it's like I feel like there are still months left in 2023, but there's actually about 6 weeks now, maybe, give or take. I think there are 3 books on my physical TBR. I have spoken about each of them before, and I really just want to get around to them, but I haven't managed to do so yet. So the first one is Jade War by Fonda Lee. I read the first book in the Greenbone Saga trilogy quite a few months ago, and that was Jade City. And in Jade City we follow 2 kind of warring families in a city called Kekon. And there is a mineral called jade, and some people can wield jade and some people can't. It makes them very sick. The people who can wield jade, it makes them much sharper, their instincts much faster, they're much stronger, they're much more tuned in, and obviously it's a resource that is really important politically and otherwise, and basically follow these 2 families. And without going into it too much, it's really interesting. It's definitely very kind of Eastern Asian coded, and there's martial arts in this, which is great. But yes, I'm really looking forward to getting into it, and I really hope to get around to it, because I feel like I've been saying for months that I want to read this book. The next one then is also part of a trilogy, but it is the 3rd book in a trilogy. So it is a Robin Hobb book, and if you've been around a little while, you know I've been reading her Farseer trilogy. So I read Assassin's Apprentice, Royal Assassin, and now I want to read Assassin's Quest. We follow a boy named Fitz, and he is the illegitimate son of the king in waiting, so he's the illegitimate grandson of the king. And Fitz grows up in the keep of the castle, but he is not really accepted as a member of the royal family, and he is trained as an assassin. And there's lots in this about animals, and there's lots of really great relationships with animals, and I feel where Robin Hobb really shines is actually her characters and her relationships. So if you're looking for a really fast-paced fantasy, this is not it. I don't know how Robin Hobb managed to do it, but she wrote a really engaging, character-driven fantasy novel. And I absolutely have adored the first two books, and I really want to get around to reading this before the end of the year. It is quite long. It's over 800 pages. So look, here's where this 6 weeks are under serious pressure, but however, I'll see what I can do. Okay, and then the next one is a sci-fi novel, and I have kind of been putting it off a little bit. So this year I have been dipping my toe into sci-fi a little bit more. I've read some nice kind of cozy sci-fi, and I feel like I'm ready to read a little bit more. But that said, I am not like a sciencey person, and sometimes things do go a little bit over my head, but I would really like to start this trilogy. So the first one is The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu, and I'm just going to read the back of it rather than trying to bumble on about what this is about. So it is 1967, and Yi Wenji witnesses Red Guards beat her father to death during China's Cultural Revolution. This singular event will shape not only the rest of her life but also the future of mankind. 4 decades later, Beijing police ask nanotech engineer Wang Mao to infiltrate a secretive cabal of scientists after a spate of inexplicable suicides. Wang's investigation will lead him to a mysterious online game and immerse him in a virtual world ruled by the intractable and unpredictable interaction of its three sons. This is the three-body problem, and it is the key to everything. The key to the scientist's deaths, the key to a conspiracy that spans light years, and the key to the extinction-level threat humanity now faces. And that's that in a nutshell. I do feel a little bit intimidated by it. I've heard it's a little bit difficult to get into, but I'm looking forward to the challenge. At the moment, I'm listening to an Andy Weir book, which is also a sci-fi, and I'm really enjoying it, but I feel like it's a bit more of a tame sci-fi than this one. As an aside, if you have kind of any accessible sci-fi that you'd like to recommend, please let me know down in the comments below. The next question then is there a book that you think could still shock you and become your favourite book of the year? Short answer, no, because I feel like I have already probably read my favourite book of the year. I would be very surprised if something was to surpass that for me. So I do have quite a few books that I'm really looking forward to reading by the end of the year. I don't think there's going to be a book that will surpass A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara for me. So presumably you've heard about this book, but it's a contemporary literary novel that's set primarily in New York, and we follow 4 different men who meet each other in college, and we follow them and their relationships throughout kind of the rest of the span of their lives. It is really well written. The prose is so sharp. It's so kind of postmodern in that there's stories within stories within stories. It's this stupendous feat of a book, I think. But you will have also heard that it is an incredibly traumatic read, and yes, it is. Don't feel like that is something that is exaggerated. There are a lot of triggers in this book, and I would say that if you're somebody who has specific triggers, don't go into this book without doing a bit of research first. I have read a lot of really difficult and really sad and really traumatic books in my time, but I will say that this one easily took the cake for the top of that list. I have never cried as much while reading a book in my life, and I strive to find books that will make me cry, so take from that what you will. I absolutely loved it, but I do respect that it's not a book for everybody, and I don't want to send somebody out there to say, oh, this is the greatest book ever, and then for it to have a profound impact on somebody. So do take this recommendation with a pinch of salt, and do your research if it's something that you are planning on maybe going into in the near future. And then the final question is, have you already started making reading plans for 2024? Yes and no. So for 2023, I had one reading goal, and that was to read one specific book. So I didn't have a real numerical goal. There was just one book that I wanted to stake my flag in and say I'd read it. And I did read it, and that was War and Peace. by Leo Tolstoy, of course, and that book is over 1,200 pages, and I was really intimidated by it because it's obviously really long. It's a Russian classic novel. Sometimes I find classics really difficult, and this one in particular, I felt like I didn't have much kind of historical or contextual knowledge or background about it before I went into it, and maybe I would have gotten a lot more out of it if I'd had, but I went into it and I did my best, and I'm happy to say that I actually did quite enjoy it and get a lot more out of it than I expected. I think it took me about 3 months to read, interspersed between other books that I was reading at the time. So I think that this coming year I would like to do something similar and read another kind of hefty classic that's been on my shelf for a while. And the classic that I've chosen, while it's only about half the length of War and Peace, I still feel quite intimidated by it, but I do really want to read it, and that is, of course, The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo. So we follow a disabled man who lives in Notre Dame, and he rings the bells, and he's kept there by a man called Frollo, I think his name is, and he's a really nasty man, and he's intent on running a lot of kind of Romanian gypsies out of the city. He's incredibly racist, and he's actually really horrible to our main character Quasimodo as well. Now, my only real knowledge of this story is from the 90s Disney film, so I don't know if there are talking and singing gargoyles in this story or if it was something that Disney embellished upon, but something tells me it was probably a Disney embellishment. But I am really excited to read this story for how it was truly written. I absolutely loved that film as a child and have always been really interested in reading the original story, so that's one. If there's anybody out there who would like to read along with me, please do let me know, because I do feel a bit intimidated by it. But that's one book for 2024 that I want to read. And then another one is it's another sequel, well, technically a prequel, but I last year read The Priory of the Orange Tree, as did my partner, in around the same time, and we both really loved it. So naturally this year then, when A Day of Fallen Night was published by Samantha Shannon, I went out and got us a couple copies, and neither of us have actually read it yet. My partner did start it, but wasn't enjoying it as much as he thought he would, and put it down for another day when he felt like he might be more in the mood for it. So I've heard very mixed reviews about this book, and I'm a little bit nervous to read it because I loved Priory so much, and naturally it is quite chunky as well. But we have both agreed that we will read it in January of the coming year, so that's the other plan that I have for reading for next year. Otherwise, I'm just gonna wing it. I'm gonna mood read as ever. That's how we roll here on this channel and in my life. Have you yourself got any big reading plans for the rest of the year, or is there any challenge or plan you have for your reading for next year? Let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. I'm really grateful that you were here and that you've stayed to the end, and if you're so inclined, please do give a like or a subscribe. Absolutely no pressure as ever. I hope you're doing well. I really hope you're minding yourself, and I shall chat to you next Sunday with another video. Talk to you then. Bye bye.